I helped a homeless man, but he led me to a place that made my jaw drop. Growing up, my family had a clear favorite, and spoiler alert, it wasn't me. My older brother was a golden child, the future of our family name. Straight A's, star athlete, off to a top-tier university while I was just there. I wasn't failing at life, but in my parents' eyes, I might as well have been. At 18, I knew better than to expect handouts. If I wanted college, I had to pay for it myself. So I worked, mowing lawns, flipping burgers, stocking shelves at the local grocery store. I wasn't making bank, but at least I was trying. My parents, though, they saw my income as their new financial cushion. Since you're working now, you should help with the bills. Not a request. More like a company policy I wasn't aware of when I signed up to be born. Meanwhile, my brother was living the dream. Full tuition covered, an off-campus apartment paid for, and a brand new car parked in the driveway that I wasn't even allowed to touch. Meanwhile, I was rationing gas money and pretending instant noodles were a gourmet meal. Things finally boiled over one night after work. I came home exhausted, just hoping for a quiet evening, but instead, I walked straight into World War III. Except I was the enemy. "You're not pulling your weight," my dad barked. Not pulling my weight? I was the only one in the house with a job. But logic wasn't invited to this conversation. The fight escalated fast. Accusations flew, voices rose, and by the time it was over, I was standing at the front door with duffel bag, staring at my dad's red face. "You'll never be anything." And just like that, I was out. I stood on the porch for a long minute, the weight of it all sinking in. No home, no backup plan, just a couple $100 and whatever I could fit in my bag. So I did what any broke 18-year-old would do. I found the cheapest motel in town and checked in for the night. One of those places where the neon sign flickered like it was giving up on life, and the front desk guy barely looked up when I walked in. The room smelled like cheap air freshener and regret, but the bed was a bed. I dropped onto it, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do next. I needed a job, a real one, something that paid enough to cover rent, food, and maybe even a future. The next morning, I hit the pavement. That's how I found the gas station gig. It was one of those massive chains. You see them on every highway, promising clean bathrooms and overpriced snacks. They had a help wanted sign taped to the door, so I walked in, filled out an application, and 20 minutes later, I was in the back room with a guy who looked like he powered through life on caffeine in spite. "You ever worked retail before?" he asked, flipping through my empty resume. "Yeah, I lied. Tons." He squinted at me like he knew I was full of it, but didn't care enough to call me out. "You'll run the register, stock shelves, clean, and handle whatever mess shows up. No slacking." I nodded. "Got it. Be here tomorrow at 6. And just like that, I had a job. Turns out, working at a gas station wasn't as easy as it looked. The customers were unpredictable. The store was a disaster, and my manager, Mike, had the patience of a caffeinated drill sergeant. "If you got time to lean, you got time to clean," he snapped on my first shift. So I cleaned. Shelves, floors, coffee machines, even the bathroom, which looked like it had survived multiple apocalypses. If something needed doing, it landed on me. The pay wasn't great, but it was better than my last jobs. At least it was mine. And for now, that was enough. I just didn't know yet how much this job was about to change everything. A year passed, and life at the gas station had settled into a routine. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, kept me afloat, and more importantly, gave me time to think. Between shifts, I started taking night classes, business management, accounting, even a marketing course. Nothing fancy, just enough to give me a shot at something better. Maybe one day I'd run my own place, a little cafe, a food truck, hell, even my own gas station if it came to that. The dream wasn't clear, but at least I had one. Then came a night everything changed. It had been raining for hours, the kind of downpour that made people regret every life decision that led them outside. Customers dashed in and out, shaking off their jackets, cursing the weather. I had just finished mopping near the coffee station when I spotted him. A guy stood near the edge of the lot, barely visible under a flickering streetlight. He was soaked, his coat clinging to him like a second skin, arms wrapped around himself against the cold. He wasn't panhandling, wasn't hassling anyone, just standing there, staring into the distance like he had nowhere else to be. I sighed, grabbed my jacket, and stepped outside. The rain hit me like a slap, cold and unforgiving. The guy barely reacted as I walked up. "You need something?" I asked, try not to sound like I was assuming anything. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it much lately. "Just hungry." That was all I needed to hear. "Come inside," I said, jerking my head toward the store. He hesitated. "Don't want to cause trouble." "Then don't," I said. "Just get warm." I led him past the rows of snacks and lottery tickets, straight to the back where employees took breaks. The room wasn't much. A metal table, a fridge that sounded like it was dying, a couple plastic chairs. But it was dry. I grabbed a pre-packaged sandwich from the cooler, poured a fresh coffee, and set them in front of him. "Eat." He didn't waste time. The sandwich disappeared in seconds. The coffee drained just as fast. When he was done, he wiped his mouth with his sleeve and finally looked at me. "Name's Walt." I nodded. Saw your name tag," he said with a grin. "Fair enough." He shifted in his chair, clearly uneasy. "I appreciate this, kid, but I don't want to get you in trouble." I waved him off. "Don't worry about it." He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but then the break room door swung open. And just like that, my good deed for the night went south. Mike. Of course it had to be Mike. He wasn't supposed to be here. Usually, he only came in for morning shifts, but every now and then, he'd pop in unannounced, just to make sure no one was slacking off. And tonight, he must have decided to check up on me. His eyes landed on Walt immediately. His expression went from mild annoyance to full-blown outrage in record time. "What's this?" he demanded, stepping closer. I stood up a little straighter, just letting him warm up. "It's pouring out there." Mike's face twisted. "He's not a customer." I could feel Walt shifting beside me, already bracing himself to leave. I wasn't about to let that happen. "He's not bothering anyone," I said. Mike wasn't having it. "Get him out." I clenched my jaw. "It's just for a little while." He was hungry. I bought him food. Mike's voice got sharper. "This isn't charity. Either he goes or you do." Walt was already pushing back his chair, holding his hands up. "It's fine. I don't want to cause trouble." But that wasn't the point anymore. I looked Mike dead in the eye. "It's raining. He's not a stray dog you kick off your porch." Mike crossed his arms. "Then you can leave with him. You're fired." Just like that. I stood there for a second, letting it sink in. Walt looked at me like he wanted to apologize, but he had nothing to be sorry for. I had a choice. Let Mike push me around, let him decide what kind of person I was going to be, or stand by what I knew was right. So I made my choice. I took off my name tag, set it on the table, and walked out with Walt. The rain was still coming down in sheets, but for some reason, I didn't feel cold anymore. The rain was still coming down hard, so Walt and I took shelter under the awning of a closed storefront, waiting it out. We stood in silence, shaking off the droplets clinging to our jackets, watching as the heavy downpour gradually lost its strength. The neon lights reflecting off the wet pavement made everything look surreal, like we were standing in a painting instead of real life. The rhythmic pattering of raindrops hitting the ground slowly faded into nothing, and within a few minutes, the rain stopped completely, leaving behind that fresh, damp smell that always made everything feel a little cleaner, even if nothing really changed. Walt and I stepped out onto the sidewalk, our shoes slapping against the wet pavement, the neon lights from the gas station flickering behind us. I didn't have a plan. No job. No clue where my next paycheck was coming from. Just a duffel bag with a few shirts and a guy I barely knew walking beside me like we'd been friends forever. We didn't talk much at first, just walked in the direction of nowhere in particular. A few blocks down, I spotted a 24-hour donut shop, the kind of place where the coffee is always burnt hot, and the pastries are either fresh or rock hard depending on your luck. I bought us both coffee and a couple of donuts, spending money I definitely shouldn't have been spending. Walt gave me a look, but didn't argue. We took our food and found a bench in a park nearby, steam rising from our cups as the damp air settled around us. I stared down at my coffee, trying to wrap my head around what just happened. Fired. Just like that. I wasn't naive. I knew gas station jobs weren't forever, but I figured I'd at least quit on my own terms. Not because I refused to kick Guy out into the rain. Walt broke the silence first. "You got a good heart, kid," he said, sipping his coffee. "That's rare these days." I let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, well, good hearts don't pay for motel rooms and food." He nodded like he understood. "Maybe not, but life has a way of paying back the good ones. You do right by people, and eventually it comes back around." I glanced at him. "You really believe that?" He shrugged. "Seen it happen more times than I can count. You throw good out into the world. It doesn't just disappear. It finds its way back to you, sometimes in ways you don't expect." I wasn't sure if I believed him, but I wanted to, because right now, I could use a little of that karma he was talking about. We sat there for a while, sipping coffee, watching the world move on around us. People heading home, cars rolling through the wet streets, the occasional jogger who clearly took their workout routine way too seriously. A couple of teenagers passed by, huddled together under one oversized hoodie, laughing like they didn't have a single worry in the world. A guy on a bike whizzed past, barely avoiding a puddle that probably would have soaked him if he had been just a second slower. Across the street, a late-night diner buzzed with life, steam fogging up the windows as customers inside enjoyed their greasy food and lukewarm coffee. Then a guy stumbled past us, barely keeping his balance. He was dressed decent enough, button-up shirt, slacks, but he was swaying like he was on a boat in the middle of a storm. Walt raised an eyebrow, and I smirked. "Guess somebody just got paid." I muttered. The guy made it a few more feet before stopping to lean against a street lamp, fumbling with his jacket like he was trying to get something out of his pocket. A second later, he straightened up and kept walking, disappearing into the night. Walt nudged me and pointed. "Hey, something's on the ground." I looked over. Sure enough, a black leather wallet was sitting right where the guy had been standing. We walked over and I picked it up. It was heavy, too heavy. I flipped it open and my breath caught for a second. Cash. A lot of it. More than enough to cover my motel for a month. Enough for food. Maybe even another shot at a job without worrying about how I'd make it until the first paycheck. If I split with Walt, we could both get a fresh start. Walt let out a low whistle. Well, looks like the universe is making a deposit. I stared at the money. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. "Man, this guy must be loaded," Walt continued, shaking his head. "Who carries this much cash?" I pulled out a few bills, flipping through them. 20s, 50s, even a couple hundreds. It was enough to make my hands itch just holding it. "There's got to be, what, a few grand in here?" Walt guessed. We could split it, get a couple of decent meals, maybe even figure something out for the long run. Then I looked up at the street lamp. The guy was gone, but he couldn't have gotten far. He might have been taking that money home to his family. I said slowly, "What if his kids are waiting for that cash? What if that's rent?" Walt sighed, shaking his head with a smile. "Kid, you really are something else." And just like that, I knew what I had to do. I shoved the wallet in my pocket and stood up, scanning the street. The guy couldn't have gone far. I just had to find him before it was too late. We walked for a while, the city winding down for the night around us. The air was crisp, still carrying the lingering scent of rain, and the streets were quiet except for the occasional car rolling by. I kept scanning ahead, hoping I hadn't lost him for good. Then, finally, I spotted him. The guy was sitting on a bench a few blocks away, hunched over, looking like he was either catching his breath or regretting every decision that had led him to this moment. Walt and I exchanged a look, then walked over. He barely noticed us at first, but when I held out the wallet, his eyes widened. He grabbed it like he wasn't sure it was real, flipping it open and scanning the contents. Relief washed over his face. He looked up, stunned. "This is my entire paycheck. My family, this is what we live on for the month." I nodded, unsure what to say. I wasn't expecting a parade or anything, but hearing that kind of hit different. He thanked us again several times, actually, before tucking the wallet into his jacket with a grip, like he wasn't letting it out of sight again. Eventually, he stood up, shook my hand, and disappeared into the night, probably heading straight home to whoever was waiting for him. After he left, Walt turned to me. "You're a good guy, kid. Not many people would have done that." I shrugged, did what anyone should have done. Walt smirked. "That's the thing. Most people don't." The night was getting late, and he stretched his arms like he was shaking off the last few hours. I should get moving. It's been a long day. I frowned. "You got somewhere to go?" He nodded. "Got a spot." I wasn't entirely convinced, but I also knew better than to push it. "I'm staying at a motel not far from here." He gave me a small smile. "Then you're doing better than most." We said our goodbyes, and I headed back to my room. Inside, I dropped onto the creaky bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed the night, getting fired, meeting Walt, returning that wallet. Felt like a week's worth of life crammed into a few hours. I didn't regret any of it. But reality was setting in. I was still jobless, and whatever money I had left wouldn't last forever. Tomorrow, I had to start over. Again. The next morning, I hit the ground running. Job hunting wasn't anything new to me, but somehow it felt harder this time. Maybe because I actually needed it now, not just as a side hustle to stash away cash for a future that didn't seem so certain anymore. I went from place to place, fast food joints, convenience stores, even a couple warehouse jobs, but nothing panned out. Either the pay was laughable or they wanted experience I didn't have. A couple of managers even gave me the look, the one that said, "Yeah, you're not what we're looking for." By the time the sun started dipping low, my feet were sore and my motivation was running on fumes. I grabbed a cheap coffee from a gas station and started heading back to the motel, trying to figure out my next move. That's when I saw him. Walt was sitting on a bench near my motel, looking like he had all the time in the world. He spotted me before I could even say anything and grinned. "Took you long enough." I raised an eyebrow. "You waiting for me?" He nodded. "Figured you'd be back sooner or later." "Let me guess, job hunting didn't go great." I sighed. "Not exactly." Walt tilted his head, studying me for a moment. Then he stood up. "You eat anything hot today?" I blinked. "What?" He dusted off his jacket. "Hot food. A real meal. Not gas station coffee. And whatever snack you talked yourself into calling lunch." I hesitated. "Not really." "Figured. Come on." I gave him a skeptical look. "Where are we going?" He grinned. "I know a place." I stared at him for a second, debating if I was about to make a mistake. But honestly, at this point, I didn't have much to lose. I nodded. "All right, let's go." Walt led me to my car, an old thing with more rust than paint but still kicking. He climbed in like he'd done it 1,000 times before, and I didn't bother questioning it. We drove through the city, past neighborhoods I didn't usually go to until we reached the outskirts. The houses got bigger, the streets quieter. Eventually, we pulled up in front of a massive estate, the kind of place that looked like it had a name instead of just an address. I gave Walt a look. "You sure this is the right spot?" He smirked. "Trust me." I wasn't so sure, but we were already here. So, against my better judgment, I killed the engine and got out. Whatever was waiting inside, I had a feeling my night was about to get a lot more interesting. Walt led me around the side of the massive house, moving like he'd done this before. The place looked like something out of a movie. Towering columns, perfectly manicured hedges, and windows big enough to make my whole motel room look like a shoebox. The kind of house where people didn't just live. They existed in a whole different reality. We stopped at a side entrance, a heavy wooden door with a small keypad next to it. Walt pressed the call button. A few seconds later, it clicked open, revealing a woman who had to be in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense kind of posture. She glanced at Walt first, then shifted her gaze to me. I wasn't sure if she was about to let us in or call the cops. "Evening, Margaret." Walt said, casual as ever. "Think we could get a hot meal?" Margaret sighed but didn't seem surprised. Her eyes flicked between us before she stepped aside. "Come in. There's enough food for everyone." We followed her inside, stepping into a warm, well-lit kitchen that smelled like heaven: garlic, roasted meat, fresh bread. My stomach growled so loudly that Walt smirked. Margaret led us through a hallway and into what I assumed was the staff quarters, a cozy, lived-in space with a long table and mismatched chairs. She motioned for us to sit while she moved toward the stove, ladling out portions of what looked like homemade stew. Thick, rich, steaming. She set down 2 heaping bowls in front of us, along with a plate of freshly baked rolls. I didn't need an invitation. The first bite nearly made me groan. After a long day of disappointment and gas station coffee, this tasted like something from another planet. Margaret sat across from us, watching as we inhaled the food. After a few minutes, I slowed down enough to ask what had been on my mind since we got here. Why are you doing this? I gestured around. Not that I'm complaining, but doesn't this kind of thing get you in trouble? Margaret took a sip of her tea before answering. I've known Walt for a long time. We used to be neighbors before life had other plans. I glanced at Walt, but he didn't say anything. He just kept eating, eyes fixed on his bowl. Margaret continued. Besides, the people who own this house, they might be rich, but they're good people. Fair. I don't think they'd be angry about a couple of hungry souls getting a meal, especially when they're not even home. That made me pause. You're sure? She gave me a knowing look. I run the staff here. Nobody's going to tell me what I can and can't do in my own kitchen. Fair enough. I went back to eating, enjoying every bite. When we finally pushed our bowls away, full and content, Margaret stood and disappeared into another room. A few minutes later, she returned with a steaming pot of coffee and a plate with a homemade pie, golden brown, flaky crust, the whole thing looking straight out of a magazine. I raised an eyebrow. You feeding us or fattening us up? Margaret smirked. Both. She cut generous slices and set them in front of us, along with fresh cups of coffee. I leaned back in my chair, feeling warmer than I had in a long time. The space around us was cozy, the kind of place that felt lived in, with little signs of everyday life scattered around. A stack of old magazines sat on the counter, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the table, and a small radio in the corner playing soft jazz. It reminded me of a home, not just a place people worked. As we ate, I found myself staring at the house through the window. How perfect everything looked, how effortless it seemed to live in a place where food and money weren't a daily worry. I exhaled. What's it like? Being rich, never stressing about rent or wondering if you'll have enough for dinner? Margaret chuckled, pouring herself another cup of coffee. Honey, just because someone has money doesn't mean they don't have problems. They just have different problems. I smirked. Yeah, must be real tough choosing between a beach house and a ski lodge. She shook her head, laughing softly. You'd be surprised. The more people have, the more they worry about losing it. I've seen wealth destroy families faster than poverty ever could. That shut me up for a second. I hadn't thought about it that way. Walt finished his pie, wiped his hands on a napkin, and leaned back in his chair. Life's funny. Sometimes it throws you curveballs. Not all of them are bad. You just have to believe that doing the right thing leads somewhere good. I wasn't sure if I bought into that yet. But tonight, I wanted to believe he was right. A couple of hours passed, the conversation flowing easily as we lingered in the warm glow of the kitchen. The smell of coffee and baked goods still filled the air, mixing with the distant hum of the refrigerator. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about my next move, my empty wallet, or the long list of things I needed to fix in my life. I was just there, a rare moment of comfort in a life that had been anything but predictable lately. Eventually, Walt pushed back his chair, stretching his arms over his head. It was late, probably time to leave before we overstayed whatever welcome we had. I followed his lead, giving Margaret a nod of appreciation as we stood to go. Just as we were about to step outside, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Then the door swung open. A woman walked in, tall, elegant, maybe in her mid-40s. Even in casual clothes, she carried herself like someone who belonged in a house like this. Confident, in control, the kind of person who didn't need to say much to make it clear she was the one in charge. The moment I saw her, my stomach dropped. I didn't need an introduction. This had to be the owner of the house. The actual person who could very easily throw us out, call the cops, or, at the very least, make sure I never set foot on this property again. My mind flashed back to the gas station, to Mike standing there with that smug look as he fired me without hesitation. My luck had been bad lately, but this, getting kicked out of a mansion after sneaking in for dinner, this would officially top the list. I braced myself for impact, but then the woman's eyes landed on Walt, and everything flipped upside down. She sighed, exasperated but not angry. How much longer is this going to go on? I haven't slept properly in days worrying about you. And then, to my absolute disbelief, she walked straight up to Walt and hugged him, tight, like she'd been waiting to do it for a long time. I swear my brain short-circuited. This woman, this clearly wealthy, put-together woman, was embracing the man I had spent the last day thinking was homeless. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was I dreaming? Had I fallen asleep back at the motel and imagined this entire night? Then Walt laughed, a real deep laugh, and patted her on the back. "You caught me," he said, shaking his head. She pulled back, giving him a look somewhere between relief and irritation. "You know I hate when you do this." I blinked. "Do what?" Walt turned to me, grinning. Then, right in front of me, he reached up and pulled at his beard. Except it wasn't a beard. It was fake. He peeled it off in one smooth motion, revealing a clean-shaven face underneath. I must have looked like an absolute idiot standing there, my mouth hanging open as I tried to process what just happened. This wasn't some guy who had fallen on hard times. This wasn't a man struggling to survive on the streets. This was a setup. The woman sighed and crossed her arms, but there was a hint of amusement in her eyes. "You've had your fun, but are you done now?" Walt smirked. "Pretty much. Got everything I needed." I felt like my brain was moving in slow motion. What exactly did you need?" He clapped me on the shoulder. "Sorry for the theater, kid, but I had to do it." Margaret, who had been silently observing this whole exchange, finally stepped forward and shook her head. "Honestly, Walt, you could have just told him the truth." Walt shrugged. "Where's the fun in that?" I was still trying to catch up. "So you're not homeless?" Walt chuckled. "Not exactly." I stared at him, my mind still spinning. "So what is this?" "Some kind of social experiment." He tilted his head. "Something like that. Let's just say I needed to see a few things for myself." The woman sighed again, but this time she looked at me. "I apologize for all of this. I imagine it must have been confusing." That was an understatement. I rubbed my temples. "So, let me get this straight. You," I pointed at Walt, "are not actually living on the streets?" "Nope." "And you," I turned to the woman, "have been worrying about him this whole time?" She nodded. "He's my husband." That nearly sent me over the edge. I groaned, running a hand down my face. "Of course he is." Walt grinned. "Now you're catching on." I didn't even know what to say. This entire night had flipped upside down so many times. I wasn't even sure which way was up anymore. Margaret cleared her throat. "Well, if the games are over, I'd say it's about time we all got some rest." Walt nodded. "Agreed." I stared at him. "So what now?" Walt gave me that same grin, the one that told me he was still enjoying this way too much. Now you go home. Get some sleep. I'll be in touch." And just like that, the door shut behind me. I stood there for a moment, staring at the massive house, then finally turned and walked back toward my car. My head was spinning, but one thing was for sure. This wasn't over. I drove back to the motel in a daze, my mind spinning like a broken record. Nothing about tonight made sense. Why would a rich guy go around pretending to be homeless? And why was I part of whatever game he was playing? Was this just some eccentric hobby for the ultra-wealthy? A real-life reality show where they disguise themselves as regular people to test the rest of us? By the time I collapsed onto my bed, my brain was fried. It was too much to process. I let sleep take over, hoping that by the time I woke up, things would make more sense. They didn't. 3 days passed. No calls. No strange messages. No sign of Walt, or whatever his real name was. I started questioning whether it had even happened. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe exhaustion and stress had finally broken me, and I had hallucinated a millionaire in a fake beard handing out life lessons like he was some undercover philosopher. I tried to go about my life. Looked for job postings. Checked classifieds. Walked into a few places asking about openings. But every time I sat down to fill out an application, my mind drifted back to that night in the mansion, to Walt grinning at me like he knew something I didn't. By noon, I was back at the motel, scrolling through listings on my phone, when someone knocked at my door. I froze. Nobody ever knocked on my door. The only people who did were either the motel manager, reminding me rent was due, or some lost tourist who had the wrong room. I hesitated, then got up and cracked the door open. A man in a dark suit stood there. Polished, professional, the kind of guy who looked like he spent his mornings negotiating deals over steak and eggs at country clubs. "Good afternoon," he said, his tone smooth but firm. "I'm here on behalf of Walt. He sent me to pick you up." I blinked. "Walt." The man nodded. "If you'll come with me." I hesitated. Every logical part of me screamed that this was insane. You don't just get into a car with a stranger in a suit because a guy you barely know told you to. But let's be real. My life wasn't exactly full of options at the moment. I grabbed my jacket, locked the door behind me, and followed the man outside. That's when I saw it. A sleek, black luxury car parked by the curb. The kind of car that didn't belong anywhere near this rundown motel. The kind of car that looked like it cost more than my entire existence. The driver stepped out and opened the back door for me like I was some VIP. I slid into the seat, sinking into the kind of leather that felt like it belonged in a private jet, and before I could say a word, we were moving. The ride was quiet. The man in the suit didn't make conversation, and I didn't push. I was too busy trying to figure out what I was walking into. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to the mansion. This time, there was no sneaking through side doors. We went straight to the front entrance. Marble steps, towering double doors. A house that looked even bigger in daylight. The driver led me inside, past expensive artwork and furniture that looked like it had been shipped in from European castles. I barely had time to take it all in before I was guided into a massive dining room. There, sitting at the head of an elegantly set table, was Walt. Except now, he wasn't dressed like a guy who had been living on the streets. No scruffy clothes. No fake beard. He wore a tailored suit, looking every bit the millionaire he actually was. Across from him sat his wife, the woman from the other night, poised and polished. A full spread of food lay on the table. Steaks, roasted vegetables, fresh bread. It looked like something out of a five-star restaurant. "Glad you could make it," Walt said, gesturing for me to sit. I lowered myself into the chair, still waiting for someone to tell me this was a joke. Then Walt leaned back and smiled. "I suppose you're wondering what this is all about." I let out a dry laugh. "You could say that." Walt nodded. "I own a chain of gas stations. Hundreds of them, actually." That caught me off guard. My stomach twisted. I already knew where this was going. He continued. "The same company you work for." I sat up straighter. "You mean?" He nodded. "I've been watching over my business for years. And in the last year alone, I've had to fire 2 CEOs because they were stealing from me. Millions gone." I barely blinked. "So what? You decided to go undercover?" His wife sighed. I told him it was reckless, but he wouldn't listen. Walt grinned. She wasn't wrong. But I needed to see things for myself. I needed to find someone I could trust. The pieces started clicking together in my head. "The gas station," I said slowly. "You were testing me." Walt nodded. "I saw what happened. You were willing to lose your job to do the right thing. Not a lot of people would have done that." I swallowed hard. "And the wallet?" He smirked, planted. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. "So this was all a setup?" "Not all of it," he said, "but enough." Walt leaned forward. "And that's why I had the manager fired. He wasn't part of the test. His reaction was real. and it showed me he didn't deserve to run that store. My stomach twisted. For a second, I thought I knew where this was going. He reached into a folder and slid a stack of papers toward me. I looked down at them, my pulse quickening. I had a feeling my life was about to change in a way I never saw coming. I looked down at the stack of papers in front of me, my hands slightly shaking as I flipped through the pages. My eyes scanned the words, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. At the top of the contract, bold and clear, was my name, and below it, in even bigger letters, was the title, Chief Executive Officer of the entire gas station chain. My breath caught in my throat. I read it again. Then again. The salary figures nearly made my head spin. Over $100,000 a month, plus bonuses, company perks, and benefits that sounded like something out of a billionaire's playbook. Private travel, exclusive retreats, a ridiculous signing bonus. This had to be a joke. A very elaborate, very expensive joke. I looked up, completely lost. Is this real? Walt leaned back in his chair, hands clasped together, looking more amused than ever. You earned it. Your honesty, your integrity. You proved to me that you're the kind of person I need running this business. Someone who does the right thing, even when it costs them. I want to put my company in the hands of someone I trust. I blinked. Me? Running everything? I've worked in one of your gas stations for a month. I stock shelves and clean coffee machines. I don't know how to be a CEO. Walt waved a hand dismissively. You won't be alone. You'll have a team of experts guiding you. Consultants, financial advisors, operations managers. The best in the industry. They'll teach you everything you need to know. You don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. You just need to be the one making sure everything is done the right way. And that's what I saw in you. I leaned back, rubbing my face, trying to process everything. Less than a week ago, I was worrying about making rent at a rundown motel. Now, I was apparently being handed an entire corporation. This is insane, I muttered. Walt chuckled. Life's funny like that. One moment you think you're at rock bottom. The next, you're exactly where you're meant to be. I shook my head, still in disbelief. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Walt grinned. Say you'll take the job, and I promise you won't regret it. I stared at the contract again. It felt too big, too much. But at the same time, something in me knew that if I walked away from this, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. I exhaled slowly, then picked up the pen. I signed my name at the bottom. Walt clapped his hands together. Good. Welcome to the team. You start next week. My head was still spinning. Just like that. Just like that. Your team already knows to expect you. They'll bring you up to speed, train you, show you how everything runs. You're not walking into this blind. I leaned back, letting the weight of the moment sink in. I don't know how to thank you. Just do what you've always done. Walt said, lead with integrity. The rest will follow. We talked for a while longer about the company, about my new role, about what my first few months would look like. Walt made it clear that I wasn't alone in this, that he and his wife were always available if I ever needed advice. By the time I finally realized how late it was, I knew I needed to leave, but there was one small issue. I don't exactly have a way back to my motel. Walt raised an eyebrow. Oh, right. I nearly forgot. He stood up and motioned for me to follow him outside. I expected him to tell his driver to take me home. Instead, we stepped into the driveway, and there, under the glow of the mansion's exterior lights, sat a brand new luxury car. Sleek, powerful, the kind of car you only see in magazines or speeding down highways and high-end commercials. I turned to Walt, confused. Whose car is that? He smirked. Yours. I nearly laughed. No way. Walt nodded. CEOs don't drive beat-up rust buckets. Consider it a part of your signing package. I stared at the car, my mind unable to keep up with how ridiculous this night had become. This feels like something out of a movie, I muttered. Walt clapped me on the shoulder. Well, sometimes life is stranger than fiction. I ran a hand over the hood of the car, still not believing this was real. But as I reached for the keys Walt handed me, I knew one thing for sure. Nothing about my life would ever be the same again. Driving into the city that morning felt like stepping into someone else's life. The brand new luxury car purred under my hands, gliding to the streets smoother than anything I had ever driven. Just days ago, I was barely scraping by, living in a rundown motel, trying to make ends meet. Now, I was pulling up to one of the tallest office buildings downtown, my name listed at the top of the executive team. It didn't feel real. I parked in the underground garage, where every car looked like it had been shipped straight from a showroom, and rode the elevator up to the top floor. The doors opened to a massive open office space. Sleek, modern, glass walls overlooking the city skyline. People were everywhere, dressed sharp, moving with purpose. Then, something strange happened. They noticed me. "Good morning, sir." "Welcome, Mr. Walker." People nodded, smiled, greeted me with respect. It was unsettling. A week ago, no one had looked at me twice. I wasn't used to this kind of attention. It felt like I had accidentally wandered onto the set of a corporate drama, and no one had realized I wasn't supposed to be here. One of the assistants, a woman named Claire, led me through the halls, pointing out different departments, introducing me to key people. I barely retained any of it. My brain was too busy trying to adjust to this alternate reality. Finally, she stopped in front of a set of tall glass doors. "This is your office." I stepped inside and had to stop myself from laughing out loud. It was ridiculous. Huge, polished, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. A sleek desk sat in the center, flanked by bookshelves and a sitting area that looked straight out of an interior design magazine. This office wasn't just for working. It was meant to impress. I walked over to the chair, sat down behind the desk, and let out a slow breath. My name was already on the desk plate. This was real. I leaned back, staring out over the city skyline. All of this because I refused to kick a man out into the rain. One decision had led me here, and I wasn't going to waste it. The first few months were a whirlwind. I had no business running a company this massive, but I wasn't alone. My team of executives, advisors, and consultants knew their stuff. I learned fast, real fast. Late nights, early mornings, business courses, meetings with industry leaders. I soaked it all up like a sponge. Walt had been right. Being CEO wasn't about knowing everything. It was about making sure the right people were in the right places and leading them with integrity. And it worked. Within a year, profits were up, operations were running smoother, and even employees at the ground level started seeing changes. Better wages, improved working conditions. I knew what it was like to be at the bottom, and I made sure no one in this company felt like just another disposable worker. I wasn't just keeping the company running. I was making it better. My relationship with Walt never changed. Despite my new position, we still saw each other all the time. I ended up buying a house not far from his estate, and we got into the habit of meeting up regularly. Sometimes at his mansion, sometimes on the golf course, though I was pretty sure he enjoyed watching me struggle more than actually playing. He became my mentor in more ways than one. Business, life, investments. He taught me things no course ever could. But more than that, he treated me like family. No matter how successful I became, he never let me forget where I started. One afternoon, as we finished up a game of golf, I leaned against my cart, watching the sun dip low over the green. "You ever regret it?" I asked. "The whole pretending to be homeless thing?" Walt chuckled, setting his club back in the bag. "Not for a second. Best decision I ever made." I shook my head, laughing. "You're crazy, you know that?" He grinned. "Maybe, but it worked, didn't it?" I couldn't argue with that. Somehow, against all odds, my life had changed in a way I never thought possible. And the craziest part? It all started with one simple act of kindness. For the past year, I had barely thought about my family. Not because I was holding a grudge, more like they had made it clear that I was no longer a part of their lives. No calls, no messages, no check-ins. It was like I had never existed to them. And honestly, I was fine with that. But life has a funny way of throwing surprises at you when you least expect it. One afternoon, I stopped by one of our gas stations to meet with the regional manager. It was a routine visit, checking in, making sure operations were running smoothly. I was dressed casually, just a button-down and jeans, nothing flashy. I never liked the idea of walking into a place like I was some kind of big shot. The manager, a sharp guy in a tailored suit, was already waiting for me inside. He knew I was coming, and from the way he was standing at attention, it was clear he wanted to make a good impression. We were in the middle of talking when I heard a car pull up outside. Something about it felt familiar. I glanced toward the window, and my stomach twisted. It was him, my brother. He stepped out of his expensive car, looking just as polished as I remembered, dressed in designer clothes, moving with that same smug confidence, like the world existed to serve him. I hadn't seen him in over a year, and if I had to guess, he had no idea I'd even be here. I watched as he walked into the store, heading straight for the counter like he owned the place. Then mid-step he froze. His eyes landed on me. For a second, his face twisted in confusion. Then a smirk crept across his lips. Well, look who it is. He strode toward me, shaking his head. Little brother, I see you finally found your calling. Working at a gas station. Guess life didn't take you too far, huh? I barely had time to open my mouth before he continued. Does your boss treat you well? Betty keeps you running around. Huh? When you're done here, maybe you can wipe down my windows. He laughed, like he had just made the joke of the century. I didn't react. I didn't have to. Before I could say a word, the manager, who had been silent up until now, stepped forward. His expression was unreadable, but there was a sharpness in his tone when he spoke. Sir, he said to my brother, I think you're confused. My brother raised an eyebrow. Oh, yeah. The manager folded his arms. This is our boss, the CEO of this entire gas station chain. The smirk on my brother's face vanished. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His eyes darted between me and the manager, like he was trying to process what he'd just heard. I didn't say anything. I just watched as the realization hit him, watched as his cocky attitude cracked, watched as his expression shifted from arrogance to disbelief. Then, as if the moment couldn't get any better, my driver stepped inside. Sir, he said, addressing me, your car is ready whenever you are. I nodded, grabbing my keys from the counter. As I walked past my brother, I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. His face said it all. I stepped outside, slid into my car, a top-tier luxury model that made us look like a toy, and pulled away from the station without a backward glance. An hour later, I was sitting in my office, sipping coffee, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Dad calling. I stared at the name for a long moment, my finger hovering over the screen. Then, without hesitation, I hit block. For the first time in my life, I was truly free.